Okay, let's call the meeting tonight of the Finance and Audit Committee to order. It's just a minute or two after 6, and we do have a forum. So we'll call it to order and commence with a roll call.
Mayor Martinez.
Here.
Councilmember Carroll.
Here.
Treasurer Baron Janetti.
Here.
Chair Steve Cooley.
Here.
Vice Chair Stephen Martino.
Here.
Member Richard Benke.
Here.
Member Anna Olvera. Here. Member Delia Fengesa.
Here.
Alternate member Andrew Forster. Alternate member Thomas Lemasters.
Here. Thank you. Do you have any notices of excused absence or? All right. So the next item is the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll ask Vice Chair Steve Martino to lead us in that.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for that. Next item on our agenda is to approve or make any adjustments that may be necessary to last meeting's agenda. Anybody have any comments, anything that needs to be reconsidered? If not, then are there any, can we get a second, or a motion to approve the minutes and a second?
I'll make a motion to approve the Finance and Audit Committee minutes of February 4th, 2019.
I'll second that.
Any opposed?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to abstain. I was not absent. I mean, I was not present. I was absent.
Thank you. And at this time, is there any anybody who needs to disclose any conflict of interest? Okay, not hearing any. I believe the next item is public comments. Do we have any requests to speak?
Yes. Libby Ramovic.
Libby Yaromovic. I have handed to you guys a set of documents. The first one is the grand jury summons that the city received in November. Remember the city announcing this to you? You will notice it's all about the money and the bonds. What'd you do with that money? This Audit and Finance Committee is a federal SEC requirement. You're supposed to be approving the money. The city pulled $61 million out of bonds last year, and they transferred all of it directly to developers, and they never disclosed it to the public. 50 million and something was new bonds, and the rest was old bonds. They drained their accounts. Nothing was built. The developers turned in documents that said, we have no receipts. And they were still reimbursed for things like soft costs, which are not reimbursable under Melrose bonds. And it's certainly not reimbursable if they have no payroll, they have no receipts to show they purchased any items or constructed anything. No CEQA EIRs, no permits, nothing. No fire stations, no roads. All the money was funneled directly to the developers. Riverside Grand Jury wants to know what kind of deals this city made with the developers since 2015, since the raids. Because there was no deal with the developers to give them all the bond money. That was never the deal. Urban Logic used to steal all the bond money. The developers only got a few county fees reimbursed, TUMP fees. They didn't get it all. The city wasn't supplementing everything they did. Tomorrow, the city council will approve another bond. It's on a piece of land in Sundance that was supposed to be the junior high. They removed the junior high and they built houses. And they're getting another bond, and it will all go to the developers.
No other speakers.
I'm sorry.
No other speakers.
All right. So let's move on to the agenda. And the first item we have is the January 2019 financial report.
I prepared the January reports for you, which will have the monthly reports now going forward, just like this. When we put them together, we noticed some large variances. The first one being the remittance of the property taxes that in prior years we've always gotten in January. The county has updated their software and they put it in place, and that made the payments just a little bit late, so we got it February 1st. So there's a timing difference when you compare the 2 years for property taxes. I put the variance in the staff report so you could see what the actual differences were from the payment we got last year to the payment we received this year. Give you some idea of what that is, and then how much of the total was just for the property taxes that the city has in the general fund then at that point. The other noticeable difference variance is the revenues from the wastewater funds, and it has to do with the timing of the billing and how it ended up posted in the general ledger. You can see that they didn't line up correctly, and I had done an analysis of that. It's the last page of the report. It kind of lines out all the months so you can see how they didn't line up properly, but how they can be compared. And you can see that the billings are also up a little bit, not just from the growth, but in the revaluation of the sewer fees themselves, how that changed over. The treasurer's report still shows that we have positive balance in the general fund, about 4.6 million at the end of January, and that we still have a strong cash position in the bank accounts of 85 million total. That is not including the trustee accounts, that's just the city and all of its various bank accounts, some of them, of course, being restricted. So if you have any other questions on the financial report?
So in adjusting for the timing, there's a slight increase, but it's basically where we expected it to be.
It is.
Thank you. Any comments? If not, looking for a motion to approve.
Libby, you remove it?
You'll notice that your CFDs are not there. Your CFD funds are not being shown to you. That's what you're here for. You are an SEC requirement to monitor the bond money, monitor the audits. Where's your CFD? Every month she shows you general ledgers, general fund, but she never shows you the CFD money. Ask her, where is the CFD money?
Looking for a motion?
Move to approve.
Second? Just speak up a little. The mics don't always catch it, and they are recorded.
Second.
Thank you. Any opposed? We'll show those as approved and move them for presentation to the City Council. The next item on our agenda is the overhead cost allocation plan. And Lana, are you the one with that information?
I am.
All right.
The cost allocation plan is a way to allocate the administrative costs of running the city to the various functions across the city. And the only way to do that is through one of two methods. One is to have an outside firm do an actual fee study, and the other, for this purpose, can be done internally by city staff. We did have an overhead cost study done as part of the fee studies, and that was done by MGT Consulting, and that was done in 2016 and 2017. We could use some of that information in the overhead allocation, but it can't be applied the same way. It was really done so that you could use it for grant purposes, what indirect costs are for grants and that kind of thing. Plus, the administration of the city was changing and has changed to the point that it's at now with different departments. So the study that was done at that time doesn't even really apply to the structure of the administration now. So what we've done is with the GFOA guidance, we went back through and we determined what our cost overhead is. And we broke it into the different departments so that we could figure out what departments needed to be looked at for an allocation to other functions. So on the little chart with all the columns and rows, I have the general government. We looked at positions as well as then what it would cost overhead-wise, what should be allocated between the different functions. Different staff has different requirements with the different functions. Right now, we have a change where the assistant city manager has more time devoted to the wastewater treatment plant. Her salary is, of course, recorded in the general fund. That's where the salaries are for most people unless they're 100% dedicated to the other functions. So we have to allocate her costs towards the wastewater treatment plant because that's where she's spending all of her time. So we looked at that, we looked at the other department heads, and then we looked at the remaining staff, and based on what they do on a day-to-day, how much of their time should be allocated towards one function or another. We have restricted funds. Those are mostly direct cost only, so if you've spent the funds in that specific way, it gets directly costed there. Then we have grants, which are for specific purposes. Generally, those are only for very specific costs that get allocated to those grants. At this time, we do not actually apportion any indirect cost to our grants. It's only direct costs. So we don't even use an allocation for the grant reimbursements that we do. We have the CFDs in all of its different pieces: administration, maintenance, service, and bond debt. We have administration costs and maintenance costs that are incurred by not just the general government side for administration, but we have public works and some of the, not public works, the community development who does some of the plans related to that. And we have community services who also has some cost that goes there, and then the grounds who has maintenance across the city for that piece of the CFD. We have the sewer plant, which has an allocation by different members of the staff depending on what their responsibilities are. And then we have the transit fund. Most of that is direct cost. There's a little bit of overhead just because of the management of the accounting, purchasing, and just oversight of that fund. So we took all of this information and we've allocated it best we can based on the information that we had available and knowing what the different roles and responsibilities are, input from other directors, making sure we agreed on this allocation, and this is what we're applying to fiscal year 18-19. We did the same type of thing for 17-18, and we will continue to do an overhead allocation like this each year because circumstances change. So as circumstances change, we need to make adjustments to this. This won't be something that once you've decided what it is, it stays that way. It definitely doesn't. So this is something that we need to look at on an annual basis as well. This is one of the internal control findings that the auditors had. These would be the auditors' BLF from fiscal 15 and fiscal 16. It's rolled over. And then we've been working with actually getting this written as a policy now so that we can take it off the list. We were doing this work, but not in any kind of written format that would be approved by anyone. So this is the first time it's being brought forward for review by this committee. If you have any questions.
One for clarification. You've stated that this was done with the guidance of the GFOA. I noticed that it is in the background and analysis, but just for clarification, what is the GFOA?
Government Finance Officers Association.
All right. And
they're national, and they also then have a California branch as well. So.
Okay. And then because of what's here, would I be correct to understand that the grants that we have do not require an allocation of indirect costs? If we had a grant that did, then that would be allocated to meet the grant requirement.
Right. Most grants will allow you to attach indirect costs to them for reimbursement. We've chosen not to do that. So we haven't attached indirect costs to any of our grants, not to the CDBG, not to the RCTC grant, none of the grants that we've had thus far have we attached any indirect management cost to.
Thank you. Any other,
Do we have public comment on this?
any questions from the committee?
Yeah, I have, I have a few questions just for my own clarification. Basically, you said, basically the GFOA guidance indicates that this can be performed by the government's own staff.
Correct.
In our case, was this the finance department staff?
It was myself, the city manager, director of administration, putting the information together based on staffing and the cost for staffing and how this all allocates out, and then with the other directors to make sure that they said, yeah, that is what personnel in my department does or doesn't do.
So initially, the three of you got together and kind of did like a rough outline of what you kind of thought some of the expenses. Then you
Right.
went and tried to confirm that with the various department
Right,
people to see if they were on board with that particular allocation.
right, if it made sense based on what they specifically did with their departments.
Okay, very good. Now, are these reimbursable expenses? In other words,
Some are.
do they actually come out of these accounts and go to the general fund of the city as reimbursable if they're?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, they do.
And-
With the sewer fund and the transit fund, because they're enterprise funds, what we have is an overhead allocation account. So it shows as expense in those two funds and as a revenue in the general fund.
Okay.
So it's just they pay the general fund for their portion of the costs based on the percentage allocation.
And I guess it was recommended that this be done like every 3 years, but since we're kind of still in a transition, you, city manager, kind of felt this would be wise to do this maybe on an annual basis for the
Yes.
time being?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's better to do it on an annual basis because circumstances always change. And at least then you're looking at what you had put in as your assumptions for the year before, and you can see if it worked out right or not. There should always be discussion of it.
I agree 100%. I think it's a good way to go, and I applaud the effort. It's a lot easier to do a budget when you kind of know where some of these reimbursable expenses are going to be coming from. And it's good to do analysis on them from year to year to make sure that they're accurate, because 35%, 30%, that 5% differential could mean $20,000, $30,000, $100,000. I mean, who knows? So I think it's very important. Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Any public comments? Okay,
I have some questions. Milana, so so I'm assuming that underneath the CFD column, where you have the percentages, that is the percentage of cost allocation that you have set aside with your team to identify as supporting the CFD
Correct.
services.
Correct.
So I have a question on, most of them certainly seem like they're within a reasonable range, and the only one that I question is the personnel director at 65%. That one seems a little higher than the others. Am I reading that wrong?
Must be.
Okay,
I'm not
underneath
sure.
community services, you have personnel, and then you have director.
Oh,
And that one's at 65%.
Yes, 65% of 60% of that position. That position is in that department, but that position also has complete oversight over the grounds personnel.
That's true.
And
That
so
is true,
that's
yeah.
why that director position is there, but 65% of the time is on the maintenance.
Yeah, that's pretty intensive. Okay, thank you for that explanation. I think that, from what I've observed, that certainly does seem, yeah, I know.
This year, it's that high. Next year, it may not be.
Right.
That's why really we should analyze this every year.
Well, this is the year that so much of the maintenance switched to crews.
Right.
And so there's a lot of effort that's going into making sure that that works in terms of the maintenance services for the outside of the HOA areas, et cetera.
Right.
So I think that that fits. And actually, I think that that fits with your looking at this annually, too, because, you may find that it's a little off and needs to be tweaked, but,
Right.
and next year may be a bit different from this year.
Right.
Because so much focus has gone on that. So I think that that's good.
I had a quick question with regards to the CFD allocations. These allocations are under the, not the capital CFDs, but the service separate ones that are the...
Administration and the service, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're now ready for a motion. Well, let's see. Yeah, a motion to accept this allocation plan and refer it on up to the council.
I think it's a receive and file, I don't see any.
You're correct.
Make it
So
happen.
I'll move to receive and file the overhead allocation plan.
Do I have a second? Any objections? Okay, that will be received and filed. And we'll move on to the next item on our agenda is the fraud program and policy. We're going to review and any recommended changes. And again, we're back to Milana.
Absolutely. This policy in a grander scheme was presented to the Finance Committee previously. After having legal review what we'd had and in further discussions, we pared it back a little bit to make it, one, manageable, but two, to make it more specific for what we were really trying to accomplish, which was to make sure that the city staff, the city employees, knew that they could report. How could they report? Where do they report to? Either anonymously or not. They can do it through our email server. The form is available electronically to them, or it's going to be a hard copy that's at the time clocks. They can fill it in and just turn it in anonymously, however they want to do that. But it gives them that mechanism and that understanding so that they can report anything that they see that they think we should investigate further. We also have already scheduled training for staff. It will be this month in March, and it's being mandatory except for those who work the off hours, the evening shifts in our 24-hour offices. Those will receive it via a different mechanism, but we're doing an actual meeting with the PowerPoint presentation twice this month in order to capture all of the city staff. Yes.
Is there a plan in place for no retaliation with any employee?
That's been, we have it in the policy, it's in the PowerPoint, it's, they're developing posters that'll be up with the, where they have all the employee disclosure stuff about disability and all of that. There's one there too, and we made sure that on the bottom, in bold, it said that there would be no retaliation, that it's against the law and under what section of the code and all that. So we're trying to make that just as clear, so they'll be more willing to report it so that we have something to go on.
So I understand this correctly. This is rolling out to all current employees, will be reviewed on an annual basis, and will it be given to all new employees upon hire within a short period of time?
Yes, and this has already been approved by our labor groups. They already have seen a copy of it.
And then we have on the bottom of page 1, an investigative committee. Oh, it is recommended that an investigative committee be comprised of the following members. So this recommendation is a recommendation to whom?
The recommendation with the city manager, once we've got this rolled out to the employees, we will then put the committee together, the investigative committee together. We'll make sure that everyone's notified of the responsibilities of the committee and if we need to meet and when and that kind of thing, so that everyone will know who's on that committee.
Okay.
But it'll probably be the members that we have listed in the recommendation.
Okay, and whose responsibility it is to follow up on that, to make sure that that committee is put together or utilized.
Oh, that would be myself, the city manager, and we would do that through the assistance of the deputy city clerk.
Okay.
Because then that's how we would call the group together to have a special meeting. It would not be open to the public during the.
So this is on an as-needed basis. Thank you. That clarifies that for me. Yes, Barry?
I have a question regarding the public, that the public can go to the city manager or member of the council or anything else. Is there any method that's going to have a documentation to ensure that it is recorded? So
We haven't gone into that side of it yet. We really wanted to focus on this side, because what we are charged with is how do we then investigate and document that in a method that would satisfy the needs or the question itself. And so we haven't decided how the best way would be to go about documenting what the complaint is, or how we would investigate it, who would investigate it, how, just all of the logistics of it. Because coming from the public, it would be a much different kind of issue.
I'm just looking that it needs a way of
It does.
documenting, so that if somebody says something to the mayor or to the city manager, that it's on record.
Right, and it can't, I mean.
Investigation, you're going to figure it out depending on.
Right. So we started with the internal first.
Okay, so part one, internal.
Part one. Mhm.
Okay. So you're still working on from the public?
Right, we are. We're trying to make sure we do that the correct way. There are also some different considerations when it comes to the police department, because they follow a different set of codes, and so we have to be really careful how we put that together.
Okay. Nancy?
I have actually a couple of comments. One is that when one of the questions was, how will this be verified that it's in place? And I would think that when you have it in place, that the auditors would spot check and make sure that the FUD, and do some sort of a report out on whatever they think the weaknesses or the strengths are
Right,
with the
that's
program.
part of their internal
Sure.
control.
Okay, and the other thing is, I have two things just to put in the stew of what you're doing to consider going to the next step. And one is, if you meet to talk about investigations, I would encourage you to figure out a method to meet off-site, so that there's not a lot of concern about that the team gets together in-house and, what's going on or whatever.
Right.
So I think that that will also put a level of independence in, where if somebody had put a report in, it doesn't make them more stressed or worried about what's going on if you've removed it to an off-site facility. So I would consider that when you're thinking about the next step of that.
Okay.
But the other thing I would also have you consider is that when you do the investigations, and maybe you need the chief, and maybe you need, I know for sure you need legal involved in that, and that is, you don't want to be inundated with spurious investigations just to be able to say that, somebody's looking at this and somebody's looking at that. You want to make sure that there's some meat. So you're going to have to figure out a method to do a real examination that gets to a level where you know whether it's a spurious investigation.
And a lot of it will depend on the complaint itself.
Yeah.
And what that entails, who's involved in it, what the actual claim is, and that will really direct how the investigation moves forward, who's involved in it, and then ultimately what we do about it.
Because, you would not want to be inundated with a number of spurious things, so that if there was a significant problem, that you would not have the resources to make sure that you could follow through on something that was significant, and not just spurious to create a lot of noise.
Okay, can you give us a guesstimate of when you believe that you may be able to report back Or when you anticipate having this second part done so that we can have the city clerk calendar it and it doesn't get lost
For what second? We're doing
for the citizenry.
That, we haven't really talked about when we want to have that in place because there are other options always available, but we can continue. We were really focused on getting the employee portion done, so.
Okay. Can we calendar that for 6 months from now?
We can do that.
Okay.
Chairman, I have a question or two. I just thought of, if that's okay. Going back to the fraud at BeaumontCA.gov, again, where is that going? Who's the recipient of that email?
There are 3 people who received that email,
Okay.
so it won't be just one person. It is 3.
Okay, so okay, I missed that. And then the city will designate a responsible individual with primary task. So who's the orchestra leader here? Does it depend? I mean, you got
It's
3
going to depend on the complaint itself, but it also, once that complaint has been lodged, and then, of course, there are 3 people who have it, when we then call the committee together, the committee will determine who's going to be the reporting secretary, if you will, to make sure that they've all been followed through.
And the responsible for investigating part, how does that investigation work if you're a committee member?
That depends on the complaint. It really can't be set in it will always be A, then B, then C. It depends on what the complaint is, and
But, I mean, do they have access to city files?
Yes.
Do they come in and question? They
Yes.
have the authority to make a meeting and talk one-on-one, that type of stuff? Okay.
Absolutely.
And is there a flow chart that kind of set up this kind of visualize how this goes?
Not yet.
Not yet? We might foresee something like that, maybe?
once we get this off the ground and we start having some experience with the different kinds of complaints that might come up and how we work through those, then we'd be better suited, I think, than to put together a flow chart.
Okay.
I have a question. Is there anything that will be in place where there'll be a monetary or a civil sanction on the person if anybody's found committing fraud?
That will be up to the district attorney's office. If we come across a complaint where we have enough evidence, we would turn that over through the police chief to the district attorney's office. Then it would become their investigation. They would take it from there. But we would always pursue whatever we could do in order to.
And is there a way to kind of hire like an outsourced party to do an oversight? Because what about if there's 3 people in charge of this internal group and one of the person in the internal group is accused? How do the
And
other
that person
2?
has to step out. They don't have anything to do with it.
So is there like, will there be like something set in place so that another outsourced group outside of the city can come in and do like a final review as to how the investigation was done?
I think it would depend on the complaint and what kind of evidence had been obtained. That maybe then an outside consultant might be needed for one reason or
Okay.
another, but I think that would probably be on a per complaint kind of basis.
I do.
Okay.
I would maybe have someone go through and test with dummy sort of information and test the whole process, just to give you a feel.
The reporting process itself?
As much as you can. Test everyone because it's brand new.
Sure.
And I know that you have tried to basically, the old expression, how do you eat an elephant? Bite at a time.
Right.
So this is the first
Right.
significant bite into this program. And that leaves you open to a lot of criticism too, as in this is missing, or this is it, or you don't really have this declared. So I commend you for doing this. You know that I've been a big proponent of getting this off the ground. You probably are tired of hearing me say that, but I know that it's going to be a painful process to make it as adequate as we can for every situation, and you don't even know what situations will happen, so it's pretty hard to anticipate it. You did take most of these concepts and methods from best practices that you found in other communities?
Best practices that we found with CFOA, CSMFO, and then also different cities in the California jurisdictions, only because I didn't want to look at things outside of California. The rules are different. So I talked to a few different finance directors about what worked and what didn't, and tried to put it together along with what we wanted to focus on as a city.
All right,
Okay,
thank you.
anything else? Okay, I think that we met that requirement of reviewing and recommending changes. And again, I think we probably want to look at this at some point down the road after you've had an opportunity to test it. And we'll leave that to you to bring that back up, since this is not an approval, but a beginning of a process on the part that we're involved with.
Right.
So I believe that issue is covered. Do we have any public comments on this?
We do not.
Okay, so the next one we move on to is the business license and reconciliation control. Again, we're back to Milana.
Absolutely. One of the other internal control findings was to find an independent way to review our business license revenue against the two softwares. One software we have issues the license, the other software has the cash receipt function, and the two don't integrate. So our first thought was that we would get integrated software, and that was the plan. But the further along we got in the process with the new software, the more we realized it wasn't going to work the way the city uses the business license system. So while we continue to look into the software and find the right mix for the integration, we needed an interim fix. So the finance department has spent time running reports in the different systems to figure out the best way to compare and reconcile for any variances or anomalies so that we can investigate them further. And what we came down to was the policy that I have written, which is a fairly short policy, but it outlines how we take information from the business license software and the cash receipting software. We compare them first. If we have a receipt that's not in license, or we have a license with no receipt, we're making a list of those. The next thing we do is pull the general ledger where we have entered, the cash receipts come in and get entered there to see if we have any adjustments. If we had anything that had to be reclassified because we found it in the wrong bucket, does that then take care of any of the anomalies or variances that we have? Whatever we're left with, we'll be taking to the administrative supervisor, and she can identify with her staff which ones are which and why, because it does occur sometimes that they don't happen at the same moment, especially for business licenses that are issued or not issued because they're waiting for a plan check or something. They did some kind of construction and they need to make sure they have their permits. Sometimes that takes longer, so there's a timing between receiving the business license financially and issuing the final business license. There are lots of little things that happen. So they need to document all the reasons for them not matching and then return it to the finance department. So we have that logged. And if there's any that they can't explain, that we can't get any evidence for, then we'll have to look at it in a different way. To test it, we did just pick 2 months randomly and looked at all the reports. I put the results here. Some of them we could find the reasons for, some of them we couldn't, but they were far enough back that I didn't have all the documents, and you can't necessarily remember what may have happened differently in 1 month from the next. So the differences weren't too extraordinarily difficult. They weren't large dollar amounts. It wasn't a huge number of things that didn't match up. So it looks like going forward, this will work because it's manageable. It's something that we can do rather quickly, get to administration. If we do it timely at the end of each month, they should easily be able to find any answers that we need. And if there are no answers, then, like I said, we'll have to take a different stab at it from a different direction and find out what's going on and why they don't have explanations.
Any comments from the committee? Any comments from the public? Okay, I believe it's appropriate for a motion to receive and file. Have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Anybody opposed? Okay, with no one opposing on that, it carries, and we'll move on to the next item, which is the internal control checklist. And again, we're back to Milana.
Absolutely. And with the two items tonight, with the overhead cost and the business license reconciliation, that is the last of the items on the auditor's internal control checklist that we created from the fiscal 17 audit report that we received. So this takes into consideration everything that they had recommendations for. I believe we have worked out all the solutions in order to continue moving forward, and now we just have to be sure we stick to all of the different things we've come up with in order to stay in compliance with the requirements. And we'll continue to grow and get better and refine some of the different items we have and move forward.
Any comments? Okay, want to thank you.
I just had one, it's just
Yes.
noting on this that all the findings have been addressed and corrective actions will be fully implemented by end of this month for all these, including the draft items.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, we just want to thank you and your staff for getting this done, and I anticipate that some things are going to come up again in the future, but we've handled the big elephant in the room, and I guess that eating of the elephant by a small bite here and a small bite there, we've made some substantial progress. And again, this is, do you have a comment?
I have one comment. I realize that when we get to the fraud policy, that we now have established that comprehensive policy.
Yes.
And then, so there's always a timing issue when it comes to the audit. So we now have that in place, but it will be now in this particular year that we finally put it in place, this fiscal year. So I realize that it's aggressive, but I would get on to the implementation as quickly as possible, because what we might hear is that the policy's in place, but we,
No, we
excuse me, need to do more.
Right, we've been doing the implementations as we go along. We're getting ready to do the first reconciliation of the monthly bus passes because we were stuck waiting for a whole period to end so that we could do that. So we're getting ready to do that. That one, I think, really was the hardest one to put together. And then, of course, we already have the fraud trainings already scheduled. Staff is already set up. All of the handbook documents are done. The postings will be done at the same time as the training. They'll be at every time clock at every location. So I think we'll have everything done this month and implemented so that we have finally cleared at least the findings as of March 31st. They'll still be on our audit report, but they'll also say when we've implemented the changes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would recommend that this be, it says receive and file, but I think this ought to be reported to the council as having been reported to this committee, so the council is fully aware of where we're at. I don't know if this is part of the agenda for.
I have a portion, and last time I noted that we were advanced. There were a couple of items that were to be taken care of this month, so I'll tell them that we've completed, finances completed.
Okay, that way if they have any questions or anything, then I think.
Okay, and I believe the action that was requested on the agenda is to receive and file, but with the treasurer's report going forward, I believe that covers your request. Any public comments? Okay, a motion to receive and file with the change that it goes forward with the treasurer's report.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, any opposition, anybody? Okay, so that carries, and we'll move forward to the next item, which is CFD overview.
Yes, this is a very large topic. There's a lot of parts, moving parts on a CFD. So I thought tonight, since it was brought up to be on the agenda this month, that I do a broad overview, and then if this committee wants to get into any particular part more deeply, we can do that. We can make the different meetings and hit each topic however you want to look at it. But I started with this flow chart, which is really an oversimplified picture of how the transactions take place. It starts with the investors purchasing the bonds that are for sale. The money then goes to the trustee who holds it. The city of Beaumont submits the requisitions, so the money is released to the city. The city then pays the developer or the vendor, depending on who performed the facility or whatever it is that the bond was sold for. And at that time then, there's a bond debt. The bond debt then is placed on the tax rolls. The city submits the documents to the county assessor. The assessor then, on an annual basis, sends the property tax bills to the property owners. Property owners then make their tax payments back to the county assessor, and the assessor then pays the city their pieces of each one of those, and the city then remits the funds to the trustee. The trustee then makes the bond debt service payments. Very simplified. There's a lot more to all the individual transaction pieces, but that's like the flow of the transaction.
I have a question.
Yes.
When is the funds from the city go to the developer? At what point of proof of work completion?
Proof of work completion. We have, we don't have the staff to perform that function in-house currently, but we're working on it. If it's small enough, we can, but generally they're too large for us to handle. So we've been sending them outsourced, where all of the invoices, the contracts, and the proof of checks, the canceled checks, are provided to support all the costs of whatever the facilities were that the bond said would reimburse for. So once that is all verified, Public Works then has to sign off that the facility itself, whatever it is done, it's complete, the city accepted it. Now all of that's in place, and the funds can then be transmitted to whoever made those payments. In general, recently, it's mostly the developers. They do the infrastructure, the construction of streets and that kind of thing. So the money then goes to them to reimburse them for those costs.
So money just doesn't come into the city and we send a bundle of money to the builder and it's at completion documented?
Correct.
Is there a process where, as the in the case of developments and public developments, let's say streets, sewers, infrastructure that are then levied as taxes onto the property owners, is there a process where the city or another outsourced entity reviews for lien releases also, that we make sure that is part of the process where there's checks and invoices, but are there also copies of lien releases, progressive lien releases, final lien releases?
On the construction itself?
Yeah, assuming that payment isn't made to the developer until the developer has used their own cash flow to make payments for all the improvements, and they're just being reimbursed, if I'm correct. They're not
Right.
cash flowing their operation off of it.
Right, but that's something else Public Works does, not just the verification of the asset and that the city's accepted it. The city won't accept it unless all the liens have been cleared, so.
And not just Public Works, but also bond improvements that would, okay.
Question?
Yes. I'm trying not to cough during this one. I asked for this to get on the agenda because we have some new members. And I wanted at least to open this up so that if they had any secondary in-depth questions, that then we could even pursue it on future agendas too, if we needed to. One of the things that is on here is the role of the trustee. And would you share with the committee what kind of information and reporting you actually get from the trustee?
The trustee reports back to the bondholders, making sure they get their payments. There's semi-annual payments. One is interest only, one is interest and principal only. They track the bonds that are outstanding. They hold the cash that is received through the county assessor. The amount that is received in CFD payments from the homeowners, that is for the debt service portion. That comes to the city, we remit that to the trustee holds it, makes the debt payments when they're due. So there's that side. The trustee also, when we sell the bonds, holds the cash from the bond sale, and they can't release it until we provide them with the requisition and all of the legal documentation that they require in order to release the funds to the city to make the payments to the vendors. That's the city's policy now. Previously, the city would do the requisitions to the trustee and have the trustee release the funds to whomever they directed them to. Now we're centralizing that, said it always comes to the city. We always want to be able to trace money coming from those construction accounts to the city and then see the city then remitted it to the correct party so that we have all of those connections. It's not just out over there and happened on the trustee side, but it's recorded on the city side, every transaction. So the trustee is holding all the money in trust and keeping an eye on the documentation that supports that in both directions. The money that they're holding that still needs to be paid out, and the money they're holding which still needs to be then used to pay off the debt service. They also work with, once we have some prepayments from enough sources in a particular improvement area, if there's enough that they can pay off a bond or a series of bonds with those funds, they're holding those funds, then they will then try to retire bond debt as early as possible based on those prepayments we've received. So the trustee really is the one holding the money of the taxpayers related to those investments, the facilities that were built, or the bond debt service that exists after that fact.
And would you tell us who our trustee is and how they were awarded the ability to be trustee and why we actually did it this way?
Right, we have Wilmington Trust. Wilmington Trust is, we had an RFP where we went out for quotes for service from different trustee agencies. We were looking for someplace that we could utilize their system, have better quality of reporting, and not have kind of an adversarial relationship, which we had with Union Bank. There were a lot of issues with them at that time. So we did go out to RFP. We selected Wilmington Trust. Their reporting is online. So what we get from them is downloaded from the internet on a secure connection where we can see the transactions, we can see the balances. We do download the statements into a PDF format, but all of the statements come as one PDF. So 1 month, the document file is just shy of 5,000 pages because of how many accounts are required to be with each CFD. So all of these account statements come out, even though some of them will have a zero balance, quite a few of them will have a zero balance, they have to be there. So these PDF files are humongous. But we use their export feature in order to download the information into Excel to manipulate it, to make sure that we then reconcile the accounts to the general ledger each month. And we do reconcile it each month. It isn't done annually as was done in the past. So we have those tied down every month.
Thank you.
And are you familiar with who audits the trustee or who regulates the trustee outside of our contract?
I don't know who they have specifically doing their audit, but they have a completely different set of rules they get audited by.
Okay, but they are audited.
Oh, yes, they are
That.
audited.
Yes. Okay, any other comments, questions?
Just a quick question, if I could. I'm looking at the chart on 104, the flow chart, where it shows this is the debt service assessment.
Mhm.
So this is showing basically a cash flow both ways. But the initial authorization, when the bond is authorized, usually on behalf of or in conjunction with a developer the landowner, the number of parties that are required, typically just the landowners on undeveloped land to authorize the bond. And then the bond is developed and investors are secured through the trustee, I take it?
Through an underwriter.
An underwriter, okay. So when that bond is issued and the investors fund it, is it all in its entirety typically where the trustee is holding the whole bond value and it's incurring investment income for them from an initial point, and then it's just metered out to the developer through the city as developments proceed, but the bondholders are earning their income from?
The bonds are not issued immediately.
Okay.
We don't. What the city has done, and that's why I said this is a really basic overview.
Right.
But what happens is before the developer actually begins to build the homes while they still have ownership of the land is when they will ask to have the CFD formed. So that's when it gets formed. It's formed, it has a rate and method, so there's a methodology already in place for when the bonds are issued, which will be in the future. The city of Beaumont has stated now that the entire development must be virtually complete, not built, but sold. We look at it being at least 90%. There are many districts that, or cities, other municipalities that don't require that. They'll do it on unimproved land, but we've said, no, it has to be virtually completely done. And only then will we then consider the bonds. We go through with all of our team for all of that. We have the underwriters and the administrators and the financial advisors and all the others that are involved in the process to determine what the bond value can be based on that rate and method. Then it goes back to then what were the acquired facilities? What is it that the developer is saying qualifies for this reimbursement? We have to have a list. And if we agree with that list, then okay, it becomes part of the document. We will then, through a bunch of different, but then we will issue the bonds. When the bonds are issued, the money then comes through when the bonds are closed. By this time, everything is done. We should have all of the invoices, the contracts, and the canceled checks. They should have already been reviewed. Public Works should have already released the rest of the documents, or the facility itself is complete, so that when that closes, that bond closes, those funds are already ready to go to where they need to. The reimbursement has already been done. The documentation has been, so we can release funds on the payment.
So it's a post-bill, reimbursable,
Yes.
fully developed,
Yes.
the majority sold, reimbursable process.
That is how we have it set up. We also, as a city, decided that we were not going to use CFD proceeds to reimburse fees. We have one exception to that because we have one developer agreement and settlement on a legal claim where we still have an obligation, if facilities aren't available, that we would reimburse them for fees. We're minimizing that as much as we possibly can, but we still have one agreement that's like that. Any others, it's only for facilities. It has to be a facility that was for the benefit of the city and the people that are in that development area.
That district. Okay, thank you.
Just one quick question. What would be the next step to further improve our reconciliation and our accountability? What do you foresee would be the next step? Because we've done quite a bit to improve so far, but there's always room for improvement. So what would you like to see in our perfect world?
We do have our requisitions. They're on the transparency portal, so you can see what's there. Each one of the transfers of funds.
Not the cost of issuance requisitions. Where are those?
The cost of issuance is handled by the underwriter, not by the city.
No.
Yes.
Okay.
Luana just answered the question to me. Just basically, I'm asking, basically, is there
What
something
we
the
could
council
do,
can keep
I
doing
think
to
that
improve?
one of the things we put together for the revenue bonds on the wastewater, CFDs are different in that it's not money the city gets to spend on something of its own doing, it's a reimbursement process. So with the wastewater bonds, those were constructing something. There's a form that I'm keeping at the back of those requisitions, and also city manager has it, and I believe he's shared it, I don't know, each time, but I know that it's been shared with city council at some point in time, where we've identified which contractors will be paid out of those bond proceeds. So we have the total amount of the bond money, where it started. We have the list of the vendors and what their contracts were approved at, and every time we do a requisition, we decrease the amount of their contract that's remaining, and we decrease the cash amount that's available in that bond. So that kind of reporting, I think, is very helpful to know what we're spending the cash on. But it doesn't work quite that way with the CFD, again, because it's a straight reimbursement mechanism. But that, I think that is really what my ultimate goal was, so that people would know what bond money we've got, what we're spending it on, how much is left, what are the contracts that go with it, to try and hold all the accountability at the same time.
Perfect, very well, thank you.
Go ahead.
You mentioned that we changed the trustee, and that we did that through process. And this is for the people that are somewhat new to the committee. Would you also explain to us who our underwriters and our bond attorneys are, and whether they're the same ones that were being used 8, 9, 10 years ago?
No, everybody is new. We have a new investment team. Some of it, I believe, occurred before I got here. But we have bond counsel, which is Stradling Yoka. Brian Forbath is the individual. He's the partner at the law firm that has oversight over our bond deals. Our financial advisor is Urban Futures, Michael Bush, who has helped quite a bit with understanding all of the various components and what the code is as far as the SEC on what's required on a municipal issuer. It's different than corporate issuers. We have Webb and Associates, Webb Municipal. They help us with all of our rate and method of apportionment calculations, with our tax assessments, prepayments, the remittances, and the management of all the different improvement areas. Then we have the underwriters that we've been using is Piper Jeffrey, and they have been amazing. They are so quick. They know so many things. I had a conversation with them this morning. I just am amazed at how much knowledge they have and how much they are doing, not just for the city of Beaumont, but for municipal debt in general, the kinds of things they're looking for and how they're trying to do, to move the monies in a way that it doesn't cost you anything extra, where they're looking for what should spreads of interest rates on the coupon versus the marketplace, and if it's a 10-year or if it's a 15-year or if it's a 12-year bond, and how much should be in each piece, and it boggles the mind how they put that all together. But they've been absolutely wonderful as underwriters.
And most of these new vendors that we're using, they, I guess I am going to cough, but they're at a reduced cost from what we had been using in the past?
Yes.
A significant?
With some of, there's been changes in the rules, you know, as always, the government always makes some changes. And one of the things that we did, and now it's part of the rules, which makes perfect sense, is that we know what they're going to charge us for any particular bond deal in advance. We know ahead of time. And with that piece in place now, and the SEC has that in their code for the municipal issuers, that you know that in advance, I think that's taken a lot of the question mark out of it. And it's not based on, you know, kind of the dartboard method. It's not like that. It's much more specific.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question, just out of curiosity. I know several years ago when we were wrestling with this whole issue and looking at different partners to kind of restart this whole program in a positive light. One of the big questions that was raised was the 2% escalator clause, and I'm just wondering if that's still in vogue, or?
No. Where we've been able to.
I know we've eliminated a lot of them because
Right.
we refinanced, but.
The new ones
The new
also.
ones.
It's the one developer where it's an older litigated settlement where they have the ability to have some fees reimbursed. They also have the ability to have the 2% escalators. We're still fighting it, and we asked for them not to keep a level debt service, but they have the right to require it. Otherwise, no new deals have 2%. We're still looking for when can we do, I call it a refinancing in the industry, they call it refunding, but when you do a refinancing of these bonds, if there's a way to lower the interest rate and keep the term the same, change it to a level debt service, at that point in time, if you can still save the homeowners 3%, then we'll do it. If you can't save that much, it's not worth the fees to do it. So we're just, and we look at that cost-benefit analysis depending on how much time is left on the bond as well. Sometimes the escalator, leaving it is beneficial over making it a level debt service, which sounds weird, but they did show us how that works, and
Well, I can see how.
it does.
In how many homes have we been able to actually reduce the payments on?
I don't remember. It was
It's-
a huge number.
It's in,
Yeah, it was in one of those.
do you remember what it is?
No, I was thinking,
It's like 1,700.
I was
It's
thinking,
more than that, I think.
yeah, it was a humongous number.
Yeah,
was
it is.
amazing to me. But we refunded, it was 12 improvement areas.
Yeah.
That first giant refunding we were able to do, it was on 12 improvement areas, and that's a tremendous geographic area.
Improvement areas being just the districts, the actual, or is that more of a major over the district?
Part of the madness of the CFD here in Beaumont. The entire city is District 93-1.
Right.
With a few exceptions, but that's 93-1. And then it's a giant puzzle of pieces. And each one of those pieces is an improvement area from 1 to, I know of 25. It might be more, but I know 1 to 25. And even some of those in between, there's 8 has 8A, 8B, 8C, 8D, 8E, and 8F. So it's not just 8, it's in even more sub-pieces. So each one of those pieces falls underneath this giant CFD program. And so each one of those little areas can have its own bond and bond debt service. So it's, yeah,
Would
it's hard
you
to-
tell us at the next meeting how many homes actually we were able to reduce the?
I will find that, because I
Okay.
know we had that documented, how many homes were in that refunding.
All right, thank
Would-
you.
Would we be able to also know what specific districts were, still have the 2% escalator that haven't been able to be refunded?
That actually would be good, a summary report.
And then is there a way to find out when, the different districts, when those bonds are set to close already?
I can get a maturity schedule for each of them, so you can see that. We're keeping a master of all of them, but then we had a whole bunch happen at once, and we have to go back and update it. But I did have that at one time, so.
Does, I saw on here that Web might do like, you know how they do those public outreach? If maybe they can hand those out, that way the city doesn't spend the time when they do, you know, when they go out and do the public forums and all that, to like the,
Oh, when we did the workshop itself?
right,
Yeah.
the workshop itself, if they can just give those out so that instead of using the city money, you know, make that part of their to-do list.
You mean, I know that we have that particular one was because of everything that was going on, and it is on the website at all times. I know that we have council and the city manager will go to different homeowners associations throughout the year, and it always comes up, so the explanations are always there. CFDs are just a difficult, complex animal to describe. It's not an easy thing.
I know, but if somebody can, if they can get just the general information as to, okay, if you're 8-1A or 8F, this is when you're set to expire and be done.
Maturity?
If I have the maturity schedule on
Right,
the.
and then, hey, generally, this is where your CFD is going to.
Right, now that's something we are working on at a different level, but yes, so maturity schedule, got it. I'm making all my notes.
Sometimes a property owner may elect to prepay off the indebtedness on the bond, or then they can partial prepay it too, correct? Once they meet a partial payoff, requirement to reduce the debt or pay it off in full, is there still any kind of authorization on that property from the prior landowner in the city where they can re-incur debt on the original CFD? So once it's free and clear, it's free and clear.
Right, once that CFD debt is prepaid and is done, that's it.
And with the exception of the service,
Correct.
which is ongoing for maintenance. Okay. Thank you.
So the second little graph that I had was really just how that service fee is remitted. And it's really just simple. It doesn't have anything to do with bond debt. It just has to do with that rate and method of apportionment and the kind of services that are covered. And it's an assessment that is on the property tax owner's bill. They pay it in with their property tax bill, and it comes to the city, and it goes into a restricted fund, and then we use it towards the maintenance of common areas, parks, all that kind of wonderful stuff that's citywide cost. So that takes care of that service assessment. On the new improvement areas, I told you not everything's under 93-1. So under the new improvement areas, with new management, we looked at that service assessment and we said, as long as the city continues to expand, we need to look at 2 additional service assessments. One being for public safety and one being for public service. Public safety, because the larger the city grows, the more we have a need for public safety. It could be in police or it could be in fire, in either one, so we would have additional service fees available towards those specific needs. The other one is for public facility. So right now we have the Chatney Center, and it's pretty close to maxed out. And so as the population grows, we're going to have need for some kind of community center available, maybe on the other side of town. Just depends on what happens. So we have this assessment also that's on those new improvement CFD areas. And we're also accumulating those into a special restricted fund. We've not spent anything we've received on the public safety or the public facility assessments yet, but we're holding those to be used towards the future. So that takes care of the service assessments. Good on those? The next page is how the city's recording all of this wonderful information that's coming in. So I really just wanted, it's hard to get a full understanding, but when it comes in from the county, we get this lump giant payment, and it comes broken down either as debt service or maintenance service or public safety or public facility, depending on what's assessed, and it's for every improvement area. So our remittance advice we get from the county when we get the big wire can be 4 or 5 pages long, because it lists every single thing. So when it comes in, our responsibility then is, of course, it's in the bank. Where do we put it? Is it administration restricted? Is it maintenance restricted? Is it public safety restricted? Is it then public facility restricted? Is it for bond debt service? Or is it that little cushion, because there is a little cushion in some improvement areas that goes into the excess, or what everyone refers to as pay-go, which can be used either to build a facility if we needed to, although it's not that much, or is it something we're holding in reserve so that if in the future we need to make up some shortfall on debt service, it's there to make the debt service payment. Those are all the different buckets that when it comes in, it has to be filtered into the general ledger. So it's in every one of those different pots. Within each pot, it's also broken down by every improvement area. So I have assessments in all of those funds for every improvement area. So I end up with a giant grid of who, where, what, when. What we're working on is what you refer to, what are we spending it on? The last 2 years, I have directed the different staffs to try and track their costs by where were you for that cost. And sometimes it's not easy, but we've changed the mindset and they're recording it more frequently now. We have a special code at the end of the chart of accounts that indicates either the improvement area or the park, because sometimes you want to know specifically how much went into the sports park, how much went into Nicholas Park, what got spent where, or is it all being spent in improvement area 7? You know, where is this going? So we're trying to track our costs by the improvement areas, And we're gonna use that to do analysis. Now that we can capture some information and have it for a little while, we can see where's the bulk of time spent, where the service is spent, you know, where is the money going specifically in the city? How is it helping the welfare of the city itself? So we're starting to get that side of it now. We'll be able to piece that together over time. Then I also listed all the bonds that we have. It gets really fun when we're trying to do a transaction for the bonds issued in 2017. So 2017A, there's a different bond issuance with each one of those improvement areas. So we actually have 10 different bond issuances in 2017, and those are the refunding ones that we did. There's, I think it's 14A is one of the ones that got split in two, but they're all in 2017. And then the ones in 2018 are all new issuances that occurred last year. So each one has its own set of bond documents, each one has its own set of bond debt service, each one has its own set of recording. So the general ledger is really spread in a lot of different directions, trying to capture all the information so we can do an analysis of an improvement area and the bond or bonds that go with it so that we can see really what's happening in each area of the city. That analysis takes a little bit of time, but now that we're capturing the information in the right way, we're able to do a little bit with it, and we'll be able to move forward with more information.
And this is markedly different than what was done.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Now, you're allowed to have a contingency
For delinquencies? Yes. We also do have that with Rev Municipal. One of the things they do is they watch that delinquency rate in each improvement area to make sure that we don't get caught short.
Does that affect the bond payment?
It can.
It can.
It can, and we don't want that to happen. So we do try and monitor the delinquency rates. They're not really very bad at all right now, but of course,
Did we have
people were
trouble?
saying that just before 2009 and 2010.
I was gonna say, did we have trouble in 08, 09?
All the bond debt service payments were made, but you can't tell from the general ledger about anything related to delinquency rates or the proper accounting between the different improvement
Yeah,
areas.
system.
Right. But they did make all of the bond debt service payments. So there's that.
So it's something.
That's it. So we now have all of these different levels of tracking. We do make all of the entries as they occur, with the only exception being interest earned. Interest can be earned on trustee accounts if there's funds sitting there that aren't spent. Like if there are required redemption funds or something like that that's sitting there, they do earn interest. We can't use them. They're used towards bond service at the end of the term or whatever the requirements are. So we do record that interest though, but only at the end of each month when we have those downloaded transactions. So otherwise, everything is recorded as we go.
Now, if a CFD sets up a new development comes CFD, created roads, sewers, infrastructure, a park goes in, all that's, and it's a 20-year assessment. At the end of 20 years, theoretically, the bond's paid off, but you do have ongoing costs with the park.
Correct.
So is the bond really paid off, or?
The bond actually, the debt is paid off, but we still have the maintenance service fee, which continues.
That continues
That does
in-
not, right, that
Until the
doesn't
park goes away,
sunset.
or whatever.
Right, because that goes towards the maintenance of common areas throughout the city.
Is that considered a secured debt, or is it an ongoing service assessment?
Service assessment.
Secured on property based upon the billing to the tax assessor,
Right,
tax
but
collector.
that's it.
But it's not actually a debt on the
Bond.
property, it's actually an assessment fee like a lighting district or something else would be.
Right. It's an assessment district.
Right.
It's a different mechanism.
Would the same go for a fire station that we built? We build the fire station, it's a complete, it's a done deal, but there are maintenance costs to a building.
Oh, sure.
So would that qualify, or?
That's
It
what
would,
it's
that's
supposed to
what
be
the
for.
service
You just never built the fire station.
That's what the service
You just paid the
assessment would be
We'll
for.
give you your
We have the
chance in a
public
moment.
safety assessment that we've now added that never existed before.
Okay.
So that would be held, it's held in reserve to be used towards public safety of the
Public safety.
future. The development impact fees that are paid by the developers, which we're not reimbursing any longer, except for the one exception. One of the many development impact fees is for a fire station. And those we've accounted for, we know how much we have there. And that is now being utilized. I believe we're still in architectural planning for the fire station. We've gotten the land now, and we're working on utility, getting there, and the actual construction. the
Design.
Architecture design, yeah, which we're working with CAL FIRE on that. So, yep, as we get to those different points. But you have to accumulate enough money to be able to do it.
Okay, any other committee member questions, comments? Yes.
One more. Milana, what elements of the CFD transactions did you say are available on the transparency portal?
The requisitions, which is from the construction funds,
Okay.
those are there. And then, of course, the bond documents themselves are there as well.
Thank you.
Any public comments?
I don't have any requests.
Okay, so then the request on this is that we receive it and file. We have a motion to that effect?
I make a motion that we file.
Yeah, second. Any opposed to that? Okay, that completes that. So the next item is the future agenda items. And that's as far as setting what they are. I believe we've had a couple come up tonight. The first of which is the fraud policy follow-up as far as the public, if we could get that on the agenda for 6 months from today, or, 6 months worth down the road meetings. Next month, on the agenda is a report back on how many homes have been refunded and a summary report giving that general information. And then, I don't think we set a time frame, Milana, but a report back of how the internal fraud policy and reporting testing came out. We need a month, 2 months?
Maybe 2,
Okay.
maybe 1. See if I can do it next time. See if we
Okay.
can get that tested out.
So we'll set that. And then I believe we had scheduled previously for a report back from myself as to the, what this committee is charged with doing by city ordinance, or city, yeah. That, and then we have to deal with a resignation that's come up. But I think let's go ahead and do the finance director's comments and the meeting.
Could I,
Yeah.
just one other item for future agenda, maybe?
Yes.
We need to, I know we've slipped, we're a little bit behind on the report from the PUN group, so could we?
Part of my comment.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay.
Can you add the maturity?
Oh,
The
that's what
different-
I was looking for. What was the word? The word I wanted was maturity. Okay, got it. I was going to look for it later. As far as my report to the committee, we're continuing to do a lot of internal policies. We're trying to get to where the city works in harmony together between departments. So I'm thinking that this committee would want to look at some of those policies going forward that we're putting that are more specific. So maybe I can bring those at a future point when the committee's ready. But the audit really has been my main focus, and there is more than one ongoing, because we also have the transit audit. And I'm supposed to have both. I was supposed to have both. I continue to supposed to have had both. But I've been told that I absolutely will have them, and that they will be here to do the presentation to City Council on the 19th. So my question to this committee is, if the committee wants to be present on the 19th for that presentation, or if the committee wants a special meeting on the 18th, I can have them present on the 18th as well. this month.
Yeah, I cannot attend that, but.
The way we've always done it is that we have it so that we can ask questions and do our examination before the city council. So I, for one, would like to continue that if we could, but others will want to weigh in, I'm sure.
It will be a final report, but it
Is
will
there
be
a-
presented.
Is there a requirement to get this done this quickly?
We need to get it filed.
Yeah, we need to
uh,
do the
so
audit
we can-
file.
We need to get it uploaded to several different sources that have been waiting for it.
Deadline is December.
So, okay, so let's just query the committee as to whether or not you would be available on the 18th. And let's start with you, Richard.
You asked the group.
We want to make sure we get a quorum.
Yeah, right now, I think so, yeah, I have no problem right now.
No, but I mean, are they?
Okay.
Yeah, well, Milano will have to determine too if they're available on the 18th.
Oh, they
Yeah.
are. I already
All
have.
right.
Oh, yeah.
good.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that.
Bet.
Extra charge. I know we don't have any control over these outside consultants, other than tracking the equipment, all that kind of stuff. I always feel uncomfortable getting things at last minute. I consider it last minutes, especially when there's a lot of numbers involved and having to go over and everything, and then passing it on to the council, who basically has to do the same thing, look it all over and ask the tough questions and stuff like that. But if that's what we gotta do, that's what we gotta do.
Okay. Anna, will you be available?
I will be available.
Okay. I will not. Nancy?
I will be available.
Mayor?
I will be available.
Barry?
Just have a comment. I mean, I'm available, but I go, we're late already. What is it to wait 2 weeks and everybody be here for the regular meeting? I mean,
Right.
Your late is late. You can't make up for not making December, and we can just be here April Fool's Day and do it, and then have it to the council the next day.
I think the council wants it on the 19th, though.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Good
Right.
point.
Okay, then, based on that, we will have a quorum, so let's go ahead and
6 o'clock.
meet on that date. Do we need a motion, or we just need to have the city clerk follow
Well, we
that?
can't really
Consensus is
take
fine.
action on it because it wasn't on the agenda.
Okay, it
So
wasn't.
basically is the
Yeah, that's correct.
question and answer on whether we're available.
Okay, all right. So is that, have we finished your comments?
That's what we've got. So the
Okay.
only other thing besides in the future meetings where I'll be bringing some of our more specific policies and procedures that we've been developing is also if there's any other detail that you would want brought to the committee about the CFD reporting, any particular piece of it, or if there's anything that you would want.
Okay. Okay, so that moves us down to the
Well,
treasurer.
getting back, real quick, back to the meeting on the 18th, will we have the data and information prior to the meeting, like Friday?
It'll be Friday, yes.
It'll be out on Friday?
Sooner if I can get it sooner,
Okay.
but Friday.
Okay. No later than Friday.
No later than Friday.
Thank you.
And then the treasurer's report. Do we have a report tonight? Okay. Okay, so that basically wraps up everything that was on the agenda. We do need to deal with a resignation. Mr. Martino's requested that we accept his notice of his resignation of the Finance and Audit Committee. And I'll just read you off his email. Basically, he says his current plan is for the resignation to be effective as of or after our meeting this Monday, which is today. And as he states, he planned on a meeting today to make sure that we still had a quorum and to follow through whatever is there. And in his email, he says it's based upon changing priorities within his personal family life and is not related to his experience on the committee. And he also states he would like to thank the city council, the chairs, for their honor and trust in appointing him, along with the courtesy and responsiveness he's received from the city officials and staff. His final comment is, my time with the committee over the last 2 years as either an alternative or voting member has had a positive learning relationship experience. And we're reluctantly, as a chair, going to accept that. This is a volunteer committee, and it works best. And just to let you know, my response back to him is, I'm sorry to see you leave the committee. I believe we've accomplished a great deal during the time you served the citizens of Beaumont on the Finance and Audit Committee. As you leave, feel proud to know that the city is in a much better position relative to financial controls and financial transparency due to your willingness to serve on the Finance and Audit Committee. Please remember that you're always welcome to participate in our meetings as a citizen, and should you desire to return your application, we'll be welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a privilege. It's been an honor. I've learned quite a bit. I understand the processes quite a bit more, that the staff is challenges, and just the volume of the workload and compliance and requirements that have to be taken on. And it's been a learning experience, and it's been a reassurance of what some of my earlier opinions or questions or concerns were. And I may be back. Got a lot of things going on right now. Thank you.
Yes. Barry, you have a comment?
In my haste, I read this thing, but I did make my notes for what I will report tomorrow night, and there was 3 items I took away from our discussion tonight. One was the revenue expenses are on target, especially when you consider the timing. There was an issue with timing, but when you look at when we received the revenue, it jives. The fraud policy, training schedule, and implementation, and we will do follow for public. And the internal audit controls, which were a concern of the council, that we are now completed with the 2017 audit recommendations. That'll be my report tomorrow.
Thank you.
Before we adjourn, can I say something?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. You've been with us a while, and it's not easy to volunteer. You've had great expertise. In particular, you always bring us questions and examination on construction and bids and RFPs and making sure that we're doing all the right things. You will be sorely missed. I just want you to know that. Thank you.
I may be back.
And thank you for your service.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we'll just announce that our next scheduled meeting is Monday, April 1st at 6 p.m. It is April Fool's Day, and maybe people may think that we're foolish for giving all this time, but I believe we all have our good intentions at heart. And we'll adjourn this meeting at 7:33.